Yeah.
Yes. So that's like that suspension of belief, right? So I think this is a place where both agnostics and atheists where things stick in their throat in relationship to something like the classic Judeo-Christian traditional belief set. And that's parodied by the proposition that people who have that faith believe in, a bearded man in the sky, let's say, and that's so preposterous that no one sensible can believe it. And then if faith requires the sacrifice of reason to that degree, then we'll sacrifice faith instead of reason. Something like that. And there's an enlightenment claim lurking at the bottom of that. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
All of that? Okay, so let me set before you a set of counter propositions, and you tell me what you think. So I've been working on this idea in my new book. It's called We Who Wrestle with God. And I've been basing this work on the proposition that there has to be a unifying, animating spirit. And so unifying means it would unify you psychologically, so it would bring the diverse elements of you together, so you weren't a house divided unto yourself. And it would also unify other people. And it has to unify the individual and other people simultaneously because, you fall into disunion psychologically, and then you're anxious and hopeless. And if you fall into disunion socially, then you fight. So the alternative to a unifying vision is psychological disintegration and social chaos, right? It's unity versus multiplicity. That's another way of thinking about it. Now, you can have a tyrannical unity, and that's not good. That's a tyrant, literally. So what might a non-tyrannical unity be like? Okay, so let me just tell you a couple of brief stories and very, very quickly. So I think the biblical corpus is a metonymic literary work. It takes one story after another and juxtaposes them, and in a somewhat non sequitur fashion, making the case that there's something in each story that's emerging that's the same. And I would say that's the monotheistic animating spirit. So the Bible is a series of meditations on the nature of the monotheistic animating spirit. And so the next question would be, well, what is that spirit? And I would say, well, that's what those stories are trying to portray. So here's some examples, and you can tell me what you think of this. So in the story of Noah, the animating spirit, so that's Yahweh, is the voice that calls the wise to prepare when the storms are approaching. And then belief is whether you abide by that voice or reject it. It's belief in both cases, because you either accept it and act it out, or you reject it and act that out. There's no faith decision. Both of those are a faith decision. Okay, so that's Noah. And then in the story of the Tower of Babel, which is the next story, the animating spirit, Yahweh, is portrayed as the spirit that totalitarians compete with when they build their towers to the heavens, and the spirit that makes everyone speak a different language if that totalitarian enterprise goes too far. That's why everybody ends up speaking a different language, like we do now. We can't even agree on what constitutes a woman. And so Yahweh is presented as something necessarily transcendent, and that if human beings build something technological to replace that, then the consequences will be, that the structure will be devastated and people will no longer be able to communicate. Okay, and then in the Abraham story, Abraham is privileged. You could say he's got white privilege, even though he was Middle Eastern. And he has rich parents, and he can just sit in his tent and eat peeled grapes and do nothing and be an overgrown infant, and he'll be secure and well-fed, sheltered, all of that. So the basic problems of his life are solved, insofar as material security can offer that. But then a voice appears to him that says, you have to leave your comfort, everything, your family, your tent, your tribe, your nation. You have to go out in the world and make your way. And then Abraham does that, and of course he's father of nations, but he does that, and he has just a dreadful time of it, right? It's tyranny and starvation, and the Egyptian aristocrats conspire to steal his wife. And, he goes right into the bloody mess of life. And Yahweh is put forward as the voice that calls him to adventure. And then I'll give you one more example. So in the story of Moses, the Exodus story, Yahweh is presented as the spirit that opposes tyranny and opposes slavery and leads the enslaved out into the desert, right, where they're lost, and guides them when they're lost towards a more positive vision. And so it's an animating spirit because animating spirits animate you. They propel you towards movement. And you're always possessed by an animating spirit. There's no way around that. It's one spirit or another. And the monotheistic claim is that all those animating spirits need to be integrated into a superordinate spirit, and that spirit has to be characterized and then celebrated. And so, so that's my counter proposition to the atheists and the agnostics, is that I think that's all just true. Now, I don't exactly know what, so tell me what you think about that.
Well, it's the last step I have a problem with, because the animating spirit, why that has to be unified and codified as God is the part of it that I don't get. For me, those things could be intuition. I, for example, have a very powerful intuition. There have been many times in my life when I've done things that were actually counterintuitive, but something has made me aware that what I must do now is X, right?
So let's go with that something. Fair enough. So I would say that what you're characterizing there, that intuition, the hypothesis in the biblical corpus is that intuition is a manifestation of an underlying unifying spirit.
No, I understand that.
Now you might,
but why is that step necessary?
Well, that is exactly the question.
And that's where faith comes in. That's the point of faith, right? And that's the step that I can't make myself make, because I don't believe that is what it is.
Okay, well, I think there's two elements of faith there. One is, if you let your intuition guide you, that's already a step of faith, because you've decided that you're going to go in the direction of your intuition rather than
a faith in
what
something.
Everyone else is doing it.
Yes.
Well, it's willing to put yourself on the line for something.
Yes.
Right. And so that faith isn't exactly, here's what I believe to be a set of facts. That faith is more, here's the risks I'm willing to take according to this set of